What's going on, guys? It is Bromley, and today I'm going to cover a topic about how to sift through BS. Specifically, I'm going to cover 3 ways to spot a charlatan, and this video is going to feature our good friend Joel Seedman. So this is a question from Thomas Doan he's one of our Patreon members. Remember, go ahead and check out Patreon for exclusive videos and for the opportunity to have your specific questions turned into videos. He asked specifically who I thought were the worst coaches and why, and he put in parentheses Joel Seedman. So I'll take the opportunity to address Joel Seedman specifically. There aren't a ton of coaches who I hate outright or who I think are objectively bad. I mean, I'll criticize people if I think they're misrepresenting or overrepresenting themselves and their methods that they're trying to sell. But for the most part, I can't think off the top of my head of a lot of garbage trainers. It really does come down to this same type that we see, that Joel Seedman is. He's this type to the nth degree. And that is the type of coach who is overly educated, overly technical, infuses jargon unnecessarily into every description, has long, complex, overly wordy explanations for what they do. Everything is novel. Everything is hyper functional. Everything is hyper varied. And a lot of the things that they portray coincidentally work out really, really good as marketing tactics. So when I see that, that's usually the first thing that makes me very skeptical. But you see a lot of this in like the strength and conditioning field anyways. You see a lot of people who are very gimmicky. And this is something that anybody that works in that field, any college coaches, they'll tell you. These people love their flavor of the week training. The fact is there hasn't really been innovation. There hasn't been anything new in recent decades. So as people are trying to fight all over each other to like stand out and build a brand, everybody ends up just grasping to whatever that new shiny object is. And that's a big problem. It really is a big problem because it's distracting. So I want this to be less of a hit piece on Joel Seedman, although I really don't feel bad about talking crap about him. I want it to be more about how to identify BS from afar, so that you're not caught in the trap of either paying somebody who you think is an authority, being coached by somebody who seems legit, or even if it's just a matter of reading resources, reading publications that people have put out because they seem to be an expert or authority. You have to have a good nose for smelling out bullshit because there is a lot of it in this field. So getting into it, let's go over the 3 ways. The first way we're going to cover, the first way to smell bullshit is by noticing if people prefer complexity over simplicity. The thing is that when you're implementing something, you always want to be able to reduce it down to its key elements, and you want to be able to explain that. I mean, when you're teaching somebody, when you're instructing somebody, you need to start small and build up over time as the topics get more complex. But as people favor complexity, especially endless complexity, you're talking about tons of variations, tons of convoluted methodologies. That is a very good sign that somebody is trying to sell you something and that the marketing is playing a role more so than, actually selling what best practices are or should be. So if you've never come across Joel Seedman, this is a guy that loves unique made up movements. They're almost always unilateral. They're almost always offset. And he always has just a very long, very drawn out explanation for why what he's doing is the best, why it's the most difficult. You can see that there is quite literally no limit. I mean, I think he just stands around in the gym all day and just plays until he comes up with a new way of doing the same thing. And every single variation he does is according to him, it's the best. According to him, it's the most brutal. And if you don't believe me, go to his Instagram, check out every single post. Here you have, offset feet. You have instability. He'll call it chaos, anti-chaos method, which just sounds stupid on the face of it. He does this one a lot where he's like hanging off the side. The impossible chest press. The most brutal chest press I have ever done. Everything is the most brutal. Everything's the hardest. So this is a good example because when it comes to getting athletes stronger, when it comes to getting people in shape, there are a few basic movement patterns, and the easiest, most straightforward way to get somebody from point A to point B is to get them good at it, have them practice it, and then progress it linearly in some fashion. And there's different methods of training organization that solve different problems, and they're all effective in some capacity. But I haven't seen a single thing about programming or training organization from Joel. I've seen specifically a hyperfixation on overly complex, convoluted movement patterns. And that leads me to believe, go back to this one. Single leg bottoms up plate press, the hardest overhead press I've ever done. I mean, it's a meme at this point, how ridiculous it is. So anyways, this is somebody who hyperfixates on complexity. You see the same type of movement patterns, same principles, and for whatever it is that they do, that's apparently the only thing he's concerned with. So that's step one. Typically, especially when you're dealing with the run-of-the-mill average trainee, it's not about complexity. It's about simplifying things so that you can get something that looks like adherence and compliance. That's ultimately what you want, because the things that create progress are pretty straightforward, and they have been for like 6 or 8 decades. So the next red flag is misrepresenting your methods and results. So I already showed how he calls everything the hardest, the most brutal. He's misrepresenting. I mean, every single movement you do, and this is just an endless stream of made up movements, every single thing you do cannot simultaneously be the hardest or most brutal or the most effective. One of the most effective moves for speed, hip drive, and explosive power. They all can't be. So that's a misrepresentation by itself. Also, there's a misrepresentation here because he gets a lot of shit for all of the variations he does. And I've seen him respond multiple times and say that 80% of the movement selection he does is very standard movement selection, and that this is the 20%. This is a cherry on top. Now, I'd have infinitely more respect for him and his creativity if he was upfront with that, but he's not. He waits till he gets called out. Why is it that literally 100% of his Instagram content are these unique, offset, single leg, complex, convoluted movement patterns that he is overselling as being the most effective, the most brutal? That in and of itself, like here he's holding on to bands and doing a pull-up with his knees up. Challenging for sure, but if you have concrete athletic goals, you have to understand what this does and how long you can increase in that capacity before it stops doing anything for your sport. That's a very important thing. Now, as far as also being disingenuous and misrepresenting, I don't see results. He highlights his clients, many of them are NFL players, but that's like this very disingenuous way to try and take credit for something that you didn't do, because these guys were good by the time they got to him, and they're the best responders. He's pre-selecting for people that made it through high school, made it through college, and out of everybody that trained, they did the best. They're the best responders. It's not like they were doing something different. They might have trained harder, but they certainly weren't training smarter through those years. So when you take those athletes and then you run them through whatever it is you're doing, and you're saying, here's this tight end, here's this pro baseball player, whatever, that is like a roundabout way of taking credit for somebody's professional status that you did not contribute to. So I really take exception to that. Also, I haven't seen anything about these types of characters that he progressed forward to the next level. I haven't seen him talk about the intermediate lifter he took to advance. I haven't seen anything about, this person sucked when they started and now they're winning bodybuilding shows. I haven't seen anything about this mediocre athlete is now somebody who got drafted. So I don't see results. I don't see validation or verification that his methods do what it is that he's claiming they do. And that's a big problem, because it'd be pretty easy. It'd be easy to substantiate. If you work with pro players for a long time, show their progress start to finish and show how it made their game better, show how they changed direction faster. But he's not showing any of that. And that's a huge problem. Charlatans and snake oil salesmen are always going to be extremely vague. They're always going to be convoluted and throw complexity at you. But they're also going to speak in this absolutist tone where everything is the best, everything is the most optimal. It's just selling on hyperspeed. That's what it is. And the thing is, it's effective because you will defer. You will defer expertise to that person when they're selling it to you. So be on the lookout for when people aren't being upfront with their results, but they're trying in a very roundabout way to get you to defer expertise to them in that way because of who they work with. The third thing that you are going to want to look out for is people who are blatant marketers. Now, if there's anything I can credit Joel Seedman with, it's that he is a great marketer. The dude is very much, I could take a lot of notes from him as far as advertising and manipulation I mean, manipulation and marketing, they're the same thing. You're trying to get people to see you the way that you want them to. And that requires psychological tricks. It requires knowing how people respond to visual cues and to certain language. So there's a couple ways he does this. And this is what stands out. I said this in the beginning. It's coincidental that a lot of the things he presents just so happen to be fantastic marketing strategies. It's never a coincidence. It's because selling and marketing takes priority, not substance or doing what he actually claims that he can do. So from a marketing standpoint, an obvious one, and this kind of ties into the complexity point, an obvious one are people that speak over your head. And this boils my fucking blood, because if you are in an authority position or a teaching position, it is absolutely your duty to communicate ideas effectively to the other person. You are the bridge in knowledge. People that go out of their way to bias towards jargon, to bias towards complex language, to speak over other people's heads, they are doing it 100% intentionally so that you get confused and defer expertise to them. It is one of the easiest, simplest, and cheapest and most easily identifiable strategies when it comes to manipulating people's perception of you that exists out there. And I'm sure you've encountered somebody at a cocktail party who you get onto some topic as far as like politics or sports or whatever, where somebody kind of knows something about. And they immediately start using turns of phrase, idioms that are peculiar to that field, and they start speaking over your head with overly technical jargon. And it is infuriating. I hate it in social circles. I hate it in professional circles. It is a cheap tactic. But thankfully for you guys, it's also one of the easiest to spot. Let's see if I can find an example of Joel being an overly technical dickbag. Like, here's a good example. This is the first one I clicked on. Simply, cleans and snatches are axial loaded movements with vertical force vectors. However, the hips, which happen to be the key muscles involved, function more in an antero-posterior hinging fashion. I don't know if that's a typo or if that's actually a word. Look, I went through physiology. I've been in this field for a long time. I can tell you that the mashing together, antero-posterior, I think he means anterior to posterior. I don't even know that that's a word. That's like a mashup of words. And he does that a lot. And an average person reading through this isn't going to know what this means. I kind of get what he's trying to say, but the way he goes about saying it is extremely obnoxious. It's not intuitive. It doesn't make this clear. And he does this for paragraphs and paragraphs. So much so that he has to go into the comments to finish his thoughts. That right there is a clear example of that marketing I was talking about. It's a way to manipulate you into deferring expertise to him, because you must have a beautiful mind to speak in such riddles that the average person doesn't get. You must have a beautiful mind to be able to creatively come up with all of these mystical, complex magic movements. So as far as the marketing goes, I mean, his language is a big giveaway, but the complexity, the convoluted selection of movements, again, that's his only focus. It's not programming structure. It's not finding, optimal ranges of volume or methods of progression. It's entirely scattershot of just a million variations of the same basic things. And these all kind of do the same way. They load you in an unconventional way. Things are offset or they're unstable, and they bring in multiple parts of your body. I mean, it's like the McGill 3 on steroids. It's bracing with like anti-rotation or anti-flexion, and it's learning how to brace and resist movement in your spine under a load while you move your limbs. And it's a million creative ways of doing the exact same goddamn thing. So from a marketing standpoint, it hits that visual trigger, that stimulation when you see something new that you think like, oh, this is exciting. What's this? Like I said, for decades, there hasn't been an innovation in training. There probably won't be until the far future, where we have nano robots that massage our muscles like the worms from Futurama. Everything's the same. It's just a matter of being good at figuring out what works for your athlete and how to keep that sustainable and moving forward. And he doesn't discuss any of that. From a marketing standpoint, I mean, again, this is brilliant. This is beautiful shit. But he's so good at marketing, because when marketing is prioritized, principles have to be low. When you drop principles through the floor, that increases your ability to prioritize sales and clicks. And that's why he has such a big following. That's why he's in, what was he, in Men's Health or Men's Fitness or something. It's not because of the results he's given. It's because of his appearance. And in that way, it's really no different than Tybo. It's really no different than the Total Gym or the Bowflex or whatever else you want to think of. It's a visually novel stimulus that leads you to believe that you're missing out on something if you don't do it. Now, the big problem I have with all of this is he's disingenuous. He's trying to sell this as something that is some crucial element of training. It's not that this stuff is without value. It absolutely has value. In fact, some of the movements I see, I'm like, If it wasn't so ridiculous, if maybe you made a couple modifications, it might be a useful way to progress some bracing component. But that is a small piece of a very big pie. Whether you're a bodybuilder, a field athlete, a lifter, everybody has different things they need to focus on. The individual is going to have to shift what they focus on based on individual need and weakness. And this just assumes that everybody should be doing all this shit at all times, and they should be paying him for the privilege of walking them through 5 million convoluted variants of the same goddamn thing. So that is my summary on how to spot charlatans, why I specifically think Joel Seedman is a charlatan. I don't even know that he's a bad coach, honestly. I mean, if he's telling the truth and 80% of what he does is standardized stuff, then he might be doing all right with his athletes. But to everybody else, and this is a criticism I made of Louis Simmons and Westside, if you're doing one thing with your athletes, but you sold this brand to the public at large, you're on the hook for the disparity of what you do versus what you sell. And what he's selling is that what you need is an endless array of overly complicated movements because something functionality. And that's just a throwback to the lazy trainers of the 1990s that got their first Swiss balls and Bosu balls and didn't know what to do with them. So all of a sudden, everything turned into an unstable push-up or split squat. It's just that to the nth degree. So that's my rant on Joel Seedman, and that is my starter troubleshooting guide for spotting snake oil salesmen and people in this industry who are largely full of shit, at least when it comes to what they are telling you to do. So go ahead and leave your experiences in the comment box. If you had any experience with charlatans, people who you thought were legit, who sold you a story, who you ended up investing too much time and money with before you figured out that they were full of shit. If you agree or disagree with anything I've said, or if you think I missed anything, go ahead and let me know in the comment box. I'll get back to everybody as soon as possible. Thanks for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.